Okay, so in this video we will be talking about props, and then we'll be talking about states. So as I told earlier, I'll be explaining more about props, and this will all be just about props. So go ahead and close this and that, and let's go back to index.js. You can remove this import statement and you can change this a little later. So let these things be. So props, what are props? Props are arguments passed into React components. So they're basically arguments that are passed into the React components. So this being the components, when you pass an argument to it, those are called as props. And props are passed to the components via the HTML attributes. And that's how we pass the props, using the HTML attributes. Let's look at an example. Let's create a class called books again, which extends React dot component, and we'll give it a render function, and let's return some value. Now the value what we'll be returning is, let's put the statement, the author of these books are. And here we won't be passing the value, but we'll be passing the value, the data, via props which will be in the component. So here let's just put two brackets, and let's go out of class, and here I'll declare a variable called my book is equal to, and here in the component I'll say books. That is okay. Let's just remove this in case that's confusing. So in this variable, I'll be putting a component. I'll be passing an argument called author, and I will give it a value or a data as j.k. I'll give the name of the author. So that'll be J.K. Rowling. And we can go ahead and close this. So I have stored it in this variable, and I can render it here, that is my book, but we haven't made the changes here inside the bracket. And as I told earlier, I'll be passing the data via props. So it goes like this: dot props dot author. And so what this does is, I'm going to pass the argument inside the component in the React the React component, and I will be using props to access this component's argument. And that's about it. It's as simple as that. And we'll see different ways to pass the data via, like, just passing the data, and how to see it in an object. So we can see how to do that. So let's go ahead and save this, and we can see that there are no errors, and here we see the author of these books are J.K. Rowling, and these are coming via props. And let's go ahead and see how to pass data. So we can use props to pass data from one component to another component as parameters. Let's see how we can do that. So go ahead and let this be the same, and let's just create another let's remove this, and let's just create another class called collection, which extends React component. Okay, so let's give it so this is basically, now we're using what we learned earlier, that is nested components. So as we go ahead, we'll be using the ones what we have learned previously. So now we'll be using props, nested components, and all these in the next thing that we're going to learn, that is state. So we'll be using all these concepts in that. So it goes one by one. So do not skip any of these concepts. So it goes as a sequel. It goes one after the other. Now let's give it a render function and a return value. Let's give it a root div. And in this root div, I'm going to say h1. So this is a collection of all my books, and after this I am going to call the component and say author is equal to J.K. Rowling. And I'll close this. So this is just another way of using props to pass data from another component. So I'm going to put it here and access it here from another component. That's about it. We are just passing data from one component to another as parameters. Now let's go ahead and call collection here. And we can close this. So give it a space and a backslash. We should see this is a collection of all my books. The author of these books are J.K. Rowling. So in this component we have say the author of these books are, and it's coming from here, and in this component saying this is the collection of all my books, and it's as simple as that. So this comes first and this, and we're just passing the argument from one component to another. So let's go through this again, and we're basically what we're going is, so here we are sending the author property. This is a property, so it's props, that is property. So the author property from collection component, from this collection component we are sending the author property to the books component. That's it. It's as simple as that. So in the next part, let's see how to send if we have a variable. So if we have a variable to send and not a string, we just have to put a variable name inside a string. Now what does this mean? It's as simple as that. So let's go under render, just like how we did before. Let's say const author is equal to J.K. Rowling, and here in author we will not be passing a string, but as we'll be passing a variable. It's not author, it's author. So we'll be passing a variable here and not a string, and this is, you can do this with props and it won't be a mistake. So you can go ahead and save that and it will still remain the same. Now you can see those changes made. So it's just another way that you can also send variables and not just strings, just to make sure that props takes in all the values. Now what if we have an object? Now this is important. If we have an object, how do we pass it? So for this we will be using a different example. So you can go ahead, you can either comment this or you can delete it. I'm going to remove it. I'm going to remove this as well. And now I'm going to show another example if we have an object. So we shall take a different example, and but the skeleton of the program is the same. So class bike extends react dot component, and let's give it a render and return a value. The manufacturer of my bike is, so I'll be passing props here and it will be coming from an object, and model of my bike is, will be doing the same thing. So it will be coming from an object. Let's see how to do that. And after this we'll create another class called collection, which extends react dot component and then a render. So inside the render, let's create our object. So that's bike info. So in this bike info we will be giving these two values. the manufacturer of my bike, and the model of the bike. So these two arguments will be passing it inside of this. But what I want to do right now is, I can also pass year as well, but for now we'll just do this. You can do that as an exercise. The year of the manufacturing of the bike. So the maker of this bike, or the manufacturer of this bike, shall be Yamaha, and the model shall be R1. Alright. Okay, so we have both these values here, and now we can return root div, and inside this root div I'm going to say this is my bike, and now I have to access these props or the properties, so I need to pass it inside a component. And which component am I using? So bike, and I'm going to pass arguments or props to it, the value. So let's pass the argument. The argument here is not a string, not a variable, but it's an object. So this is the object we want to pass. So let's say brand is equal to the argument bike info. Now I can access this brand here, and let's close this, and then backspace, backslash, and the closing tag. So this has been closed, no errors. Now here I will be using this object, the argument props. So this dot props dot, what do I need here? The maker, obviously the maker. So the manufacturer of my bike is the manufacturer, that's the maker. So this dot props dot brand, because that's how I can access it. So brand dot maker. So what just happened here? So I'm using the properties, this dot props, and I'm going to brand, and brand has bike info, the object which is passed into this variable. I'm accessing the object using brand. Now by accessing bike info, I get maker and the model values, the data. So then I just use maker for this, and I'll be using the model for this. So this dot props dot brand dot model. It's as simple as that. That's how you use props in React, and it's especially if you're using object. So what's happening here? So I'm using this dot props to access the argument that is passed into the component, and the brand where the bike info, the object, is stored inside this variable brand. Now I can, so because of doing this, I can access bike info. If I access bike info, I can get the data maker and the model. I'm going to access model for this, and let's go ahead and save it. But before saving it, we need to pass the component right here and save it now. So this is my bike. The manufacturer of my bike is Yamaha, and the model of my bike is R1. I think by mistake we put a bracket somewhere. The bracket. So there's a rogue bracket here, which is giving us that value. Alright, so that's gone. So the manufacturer of my bike is Yamaha, and the model of my bike is R1. So what we did was, we learned how to use props if it was an object, if we had to pass data from one component to another, what if it was of the variable and not a string. So we learned all this from this section. So next we'll be learning about state.